Hello, I'm David James. The Evansville Wartime Museum in Evansville, Indiana has an exhibit on the Holocaust. It features childhood memories of the horrors of World War II from two cousins, Irene Recknick and Simon Spiegelman. Well, how did these children avoid capture and the death camps? Who were their parents? Did those parents survive? And what's the message to future generations? For Irene and Simon, their young lives teetered on the edge of the abyss.
My great-great-grandfather was a scholar, studying the Bible, the Torah, and the Talmud, and so on. And his wife tended to a store. They had a modest grocery store, and she came up with the idea of producing candles and selling them in her store.
Born in southwestern Poland in the early 1800s, Simon Spiegelman's great-great-grandmother, Sisla Spiegelman's enterprising idea for candle making generated immediate income for her family and grew into a workshop producing Sabbath and general-purpose candles. Candles were the main source of illumination in those days, an indispensable household item. Around 1852, while in his late teens, Sisla's son Chaim Leib, Simon's great-grandfather, sold the candles in adjoining localities and eventually larger cities. The factory did well, and the family prospered. Chaim Leib went on to become a partner in one of the 5 large coal mines in Poland. For Chaim Leib, the Sabbath was the highlight of the week. He spent every Friday at home preparing for the Sabbath day with matters relating to his synagogue and his charities. In the evening, the gates of the homestead were shut, and all the residents prepared for the special day by kindling the Sabbath candles.
He actually built a synagogue on his estate, and family would come there for services. On Saturday night, the end of the Sabbath, and after the meal, he would stay around, and anybody who needed advice would come to him. My parents were born in a town called Dąbrowa Górnicza. It was a mining town in southern Poland. They knew each other as children because families were close-knit. My mom went to a Polish high school, and my dad did what most Jewish people did at the time. They went to the synagogue to study.
Simon's father, Max, was born in Poland on July 4th, 1905, and carried with him memories of anti-Semitism held by the local populace. Long before the Holocaust, vicious lies were spread, accusing the Jews of poisoning wells, causing disease, and even committing ritual murders of Christian children.
My father really didn't want to talk too much about that time. He thought the anti-Semitism had been horrible. My dad went into the family business. My grandfather at the time had a brewery, and he went into that business when he was young. Probably started at the age of 16 or 17.
In 1921, Max's parents, Wolf and Sura Reika, moved their family from Poland to Germany due to the anti-Semitism in Poland. Wolf started new businesses, including a beer and soda water distributorship. In 1923, there was widespread inflation in Germany and Poland, followed by a crippling recession and high unemployment. Many Germans and Poles blamed the Jews. Anti-Semitism led to violence, and looters targeted stores and shops owned by Jews. The beer and soda water business fell on hard times. The family faced large mortgage payments, and banks started calling in loans. In 1927, Max's dad again moved the family, which eventually settled in Belgium, where there was a flourishing diamond trade, and Belgium was taking in immigrants. Back in Germany, Max, now 22, sold the remaining family assets. In November of 1928, Max married Rose Kanarek and joined the family in Antwerp, Belgium. Max followed in his father's footsteps, apprenticed as a diamond cutter, and also joined the Diamond Exchange. The Spiegelman family prospered in Belgium, finding both tolerance and business opportunities.
I was born in Belgium. I had a very happy childhood. On Sundays, we usually ended up all having lunch at my grandmother's house. And that afternoon, Hitler was making a speech in Germany, and he was saying that if there's going to be war, we will destroy the Jews wherever they are.
Und außerhalb Europas gelingen sollte, die Völker noch einmal in einen Weltkrieg zu stürzen.
My family, well, everybody was listening to it. Some snickered. I remember my grandmother saying, "Oh, it's just talk. It's just talk. Let's go. Let's have lunch." Nobody believed it. We thought that was just talk, because the family, Jewish families, were used to hearing anti-Semitic remarks and talk. So we didn't believe that this was just politics, and we didn't believe it. When the war started, I was 11 years old, but I remember all the events because it had such an influence on my outlook of things, and it affected me all my life. When the war started, I was scared. We all were. The Germans were bombing Antwerp, and we went into shelters during the bombing. Usually it was the basement of apartment houses. It was a frightening thing.
Simon and his family tried to escape to England or the south of France, but some 2 million people clogged the roads, also trying to get out. So they returned to Antwerp, where German soldiers and SS Gestapo were now in control. The Belgium civil service was restored, but it was known officials took their orders from the Germans. The Belgian King Leopold became a prisoner in his castle. Simon's father went back to work on the Diamond Exchange. Schools, shops, restaurants, and movie theaters all sprung back to life until 1941.
I grew up with the idea that children are safe and nobody will harm a child, and that no matter what happens, we would be okay. I remember on Sunday afternoon going to a movie with two friends, and I remember the movie was The Three Musketeers, and we were so impressed with that movie that we walked down the street just as if we were the Three Musketeers. A German soldier was coming. As we came by, he kind of stood aside for us. It was amazing. And as I came by, he gave me a punch that I flew over on the tracks of a trolley. And he came over to me and took out the dagger he had in his pocket, and he just put it close to my neck. And he said, "You Jewish swine, just wait, and next time I'm going to get you." I thought that we were safe as children. And then I woke up to what this anti-Semitism was really all about.
In late July 1941, Simon's dad, Max, left the Diamond Exchange ahead of the 7 p.m. curfew. He carried diamond parcels home with him as restrictions against the Jews grew harsher. At the streetcar stop, a Gestapo agent who had been following Max grabbed his arm. Max jumped onto the moving streetcar and kicked and punched the agent, sending him onto the cobblestone street. A few days later, Max learned from family members he was a wanted man. Simon's grandparents came to their apartment, begging them to leave. In early August 1941, Simon, his parents, and sister left Antwerp after a sad goodbye with his grandparents.
My grandparents stayed behind. They didn't want to leave. They said, "We're old people. What will they do with us? Why would they harm us? And besides, we'll hold you back. You can escape, you can run, you can hide." When we left and went to the train station, my mother, dad said, "Oh, there'll be soldiers there and police, and just smile, be happy. Imagine you going to a wedding." And we walked to the train station smiling. And they smiled back. Nobody stopped us. My grandmother refused to go. A couple of weeks later, the Antwerp police and the Germans came to get them and put them on a train to Auschwitz. And they went to the gas chambers.
The family headed to Paris. Staying there was dangerous, and they paid an old family friend to smuggle them to unoccupied Vichy, France. They eventually arrived in Spain after a harrowing border crossing.
I was 12 then, actually crawling between watchtowers. The Germans had watchtowers all across the border. And we did it in the middle of the night. We went in groups. And there were about 30 in our groups, and some with small tots, small children and babies. And the parents gave them some, maybe aspirins or whatever it was, so they would sleep. And the fathers would carry these little children on their shoulders, strapped with a belt. And they crawled through there with it. We're all one by one. We were lucky we made it. We arrived in Spain and were immediately arrested by the Spanish police. We sat in a jail cell. There were four of us, my mother, father, my sister, and I. And then a miracle happened. A guard comes and unlocks the door and says, "Go to the office, and they will tell you what you have to do." So we went to the office, and there was the Spanish police there, and the officer gave my father a permit and said, "We checked with Spain and the Cuban consulate. You're allowed to stay in Spain 1 month, but then you got to get out and find your way to Cuba." And my father couldn't believe it. My mother embraced the guy. We were so happy.
Simon's father sold some of his hidden diamonds to buy passage on a ship sailing out of Barcelona. The 5,000-ton freighter, built in 1921, transported cattle before the war. Now the ship carried human cargo. There was little sanitation on board, and passengers had to inspect their meals for rat droppings and worms. Finally, after 4 weeks at sea, the Spiegelmans arrived in Havana.
2 weeks after we arrived, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
There was no immigration to the U.S. So, what we thought would be a month or 2 months in Havana turned out to be 5 years, waiting till the war's end, and then officially be able to immigrate to the U.S.
Diamond factories were operating in Havana, employing over 1,000 people. Simon's dad found employment working in a factory and eventually formed his own company. He became very successful. The family prospered, but it did not feel like home. Even though it would mean starting all over, the family moved to the United States in 1946.
In New York, my father became a member of the Diamond Exchange, and he was a diamond broker. When I found out that we were going to the United States, I was very excited. It was always my dream, I would say practically all my life, to be able to come to the United States, especially in New York. When I was a kid, during the German occupation, I dreamt that all of a sudden there would be a tunnel leading right to the Empire State Building, where we could get away from the German occupation. In New York, I lived on 34th Street, which is right opposite the Empire State Building, where I could stick my head out the window and see the Empire State Building was something. I was beyond amazement for me.
In 1948, after the Spiegelmans had been living in the U.S. for 2 years, 5 Arab armies attacked the newly formed state of Israel, intent on driving the Jews into the sea. Simon, who had just turned 18, joined volunteers from 59 countries to secure the Jewish homeland.
I saw this as a possibility of another Holocaust and volunteered to serve. When I came back to the United States, the Korean War had started, and I joined the U.S. Army. Korea was tough. I remember a cold winter when we would go out on patrol. I felt that I was fulfilling an obligation I had to the U.S. for allowing me to immigrate. So I did that with a sense of pride. When I was discharged, I wanted to go back to college, and I did. I studied industrial engineering, business management. I got an MBA, and then went to work for a company in management consulting, which is something I always wanted to do, to help companies improve their operations. I traveled all around the world, working with large American companies.
There's another child of the Holocaust in this family story of survival. Before World War II broke out in Poland in 1939, Simon's Aunt Regina married Eddie Rechnick. Their daughter Irene, born in 1934, was Simon's cousin. Eddie Rechnick managed a coal mine near the Polish-German border. When the Germans invaded, the Jews of Dąbrowa Górnicza were forced from their homes into ghettos. In 1944, Eddie Rechnick paid a Gentile family to take Irene into their home as one of their children. That decision, as heartbreaking as it was, saved Irene's life. Irene's parents, Eddie and Regina, were sent to a labor camp at Auschwitz. So if Irene had been sent to Auschwitz in 1944 with her parents when she was 10, she would likely have been murdered in a gas chamber.
Regina was in a women's camp. Eddie was in the men's camp. As the Russians were getting closer, the Germans didn't have enough time to execute everybody and gas them, so they started marching them towards Germany. It was in the winter, 45, January. Regina's sister, my aunt, Leosha, had also survived the camps up to that point. And they marched during the march. If you fell behind or you fell by the side, the Germans were shooting the people who had fallen. Leosha was not able to march. Her feet were frozen. But so Regina was holding her up while they were walking towards on the road. At one point, Leosha was thirsty, and there was snow all around. She ran to the side of the road and scooped up some snow that she was eating or drinking, and the German guard came over and shot her. And young Regina told me at that time, Lyosha was in my arms. I had support, I'd helped her all for years in the camp so she could get some food, and here she was dead. And minutes later, the German guards jumped on trucks and took off. They left everybody on the road.
Irene survived as a hidden child, and after reuniting with her parents, the family moved to Belgium, where her father received more medical treatment. After 8 years, they were able to immigrate to the United States and settle in Evansville, Indiana, where Irene's father's sister was living.
Irene was my first cousin. She read my book, The Edge of the Abyss. She learned a lot about what happened to a family. I had asked her, let me have your story. I want to add it to the book. And she said she can't write it. She said, when they came to get me after the war, I didn't know where I belonged. And that was it. And she never talked more about that.
Irene Recknick was our neighbor for 25 years. She was known for smiling, for her wit, and for her quietness. She was an educated woman, very smart, a Fulbright scholar, amazing addition to Evansville. I never got Irene to open up about her experiences during World War II. Over the last probably 10 years or so, we've been videoing World War II veterans. And from what I have found with talking to many of their family members, they usually don't talk. I think their experiences were so horrible that some of them pushed it behind and they didn't ever want to talk about it. I think that's what happened to Irene.
Why? What did we ever do to them to deserve this rage? What did we ever do to them? And today even, when I read about these anti-Semitic attacks or some of these nutcases bombing synagogues or shooting in synagogues, I ask myself why. What did these people ever do to them that they should deserve this kind of rage? And it hasn't changed. Anti-Semitism is still alive. There are people who deny that the Holocaust ever happened. And I'm evidence that it did. My message is, believe me, it happened. It happened in details that are even worse than you read or hear about.
There's no way to really put into words what an atrocity this was, not just for the Jewish people, but for humanity. That so many people could buy into such hatred and disdain that they could wantonly take human lives in the numbers that they did. Yet, I look around our world, it seems like there's always somebody that somebody hates that's used to motivate people and to empower people to continue practicing hatred, discrimination, bigotry. We haven't learned a lot from history because we keep repeating. I always have hope that somehow humanity will figure out how not to repeat, how not to hate, how not to persecute, how not to oppress. I have to have hope that someday that will occur.
If I had one wish, I would have liked to see my grandparents. I would like to see my parents again and just share the good times that we had together as a family. But I have it today with my daughters and family. We even took vacations together. All of us. We didn't send them off anywhere. We went together and enjoyed each other's company. We had fun together. It's been one of the joys of my life.
We're a family of survivors, and so every time, even today, when I get scared about the world as it is right now, I remind myself that I have that survivorship in me from my heritage and from my family that escaped.
Two children of the Holocaust, Simon and Irene, cousins who survived the horrors of World War II. Their message, never forget the millions who died and how it happened. Irene Recknick has endowed funds for Holocaust remembrance activities, including lectures through the Edward D. and Regina Recknick Holocaust series at the University of Southern Indiana. Sadly, Irene passed away July 19, 2022, 2 months before the inaugural lecture. In his book, At the Edge of the Abyss, Simon Spiegelman shares this passage from the Old Testament. Guard yourself and your soul carefully, lest you forget what you saw, and lest these things depart your heart all the days of your life, and you shall make them known to your children and your children's children. I'm David James. Never forget, never again.
Funding for this program was made possible through a gift from Anne Blandford in memory of the Rennick family.